Hi, everybody. Welcome to session C7, Segregation and Social Space. I'm really excited to be the session chair for this. We have a great lineup of presenters, and I think we're going to have a great panel of discourse at the end. Our first presenter that was on the docket, Sama El-Karbawi, hasn't shown yet, so we're going to give a little more time to each of the presenters that are here to be able to explain their information. I'm going to go over a few just kind of general housekeeping things before I hand it over. So as everybody knows, we have an IASD website for our virtual conference site, and we have some information that goes over just general IASD policies about just making sure that we're professional in our conduct, and then what we can do if that's not the case. We also have the working paper series. So everybody that provided a paper and was peer reviewed for inclusion of the working paper, we're providing that for free as a PDF download. So if you really enjoyed some of the presentations, be sure to check on the information page from the IASD conference website and see about downloading that. We're also offering the Traditional Dwellings and Settlements Review, the conference issue, which includes the abstracts of all the presentations that were submitted here. That's also available for free and download on the IASD overall homepage. So we're pretty excited. It's one of the silver linings for having a virtual event, to be able to offer those types of publications in advance. As with all the other sessions, you guys are probably used to it by now, but each of the presenters are going to get 23 minutes. At 20 minutes, I will change my background color to yellow, just as a soft way to let them know that their time is coming to an end. And then at about 1 minute before the end, I'll change my background color to red, and then we'll switch to the next speaker. So thank you, everybody. We'll leave questions and comments until the end. And I'm really excited, as I said before, for me as an academic, I feel like that's the best part, is when we start to get that rich exchange and that sinking into all the presentations and a little more and a little deeper in thought at the end of the discourse. We'll do that through the chat box. So if you want to type your questions in, and then I will monitor and kind of manage those questions with the panelists at the last 20 to 30 minutes of the session. All right, so with that, I have the immense pleasure of introducing our first presenter, Bedur Breker. Dr. Breker is an Egyptian researcher. She is based in Germany. She embraces a political approach to her research. Her published papers question the societal means of reclaiming the public space as a necessity to reactivate democracy. She served for 13 years as a lecturer at MSA University and the American University in Cairo. Dr. Breker joined Jan Breker Architects in 2018, and her paper is co-authored with Jan Breker, who began his architecture career with Ian Ritchie Architects in London and started a partnership in Hamburg in 2008 before starting his own office, Jan Breker Architect, in 2011. His office specializes in educational projects and other typologies, which allow them to gain a wide range of experience and unusual approaches to projects. He also served as a design seminar lecturer at University of Greenwich, London from 2007 to 2011. And Bedur is going to present their paper, which is called Mind the Gap. Why are Muslim migrants and LGBTQI not sharing the same public space in Hamburg? The case of St. George. So without further ado,
can you see that?
It looks great.
Perfect. So when I first arrived in Hamburg almost 9 years ago, I went to visit a street that my husband told me back then it was a hip street with nice atmosphere and trendy boutiques and shops for possible shopping maybe after a coffee or something. And it was called Langraya, and it didn't disappoint me back then. A few hundred meters away from that street, we walked into another one that I recall myself feeling as if I was transferred via a spaceship or a Star Trek beamer into the Middle East, where I heard, smelled, and saw many things that reminded me of home. That was Steindam. Both of them are the main actors of this paper, and both of them are located in St. George, the neighborhood in Hamburg. Can we create more trusting public spaces based on changing the way we think of the other? Hamburg is a metropolitan city, but equity and freedom within some of its public spaces can be a myth. St. George is one of its neighborhoods that shows how extreme prejudices and societal fear can prevent some of its spaces from becoming openly accessible for certain minorities. St. George is a district that went through tremendous societal and spatial changes since its existence. Those changes transformed it into a complex organism molded by a variety of forces of mixed cultures, identities, faiths, and social behaviors. It is mainly occupied by several minorities. Each created its own enclave with particular semiotics and exclusive messages that define them as the whole and perceive the rest of the society as the other. Langeweile is a pursued destination for the LGBTQ groups, while Steindam is the port of call for Muslim immigrants. Through inspecting both streets, we tried to underline some major issues that contributed in creating inaccessible public spaces. We definitely acknowledge that it is not an extra, rather a need for any community to ensure social, cultural, environmental, and economic adaptability within the frame of accepting the other. Our aim is to simply contribute to current pressing debates about the shaping processes of public spaces by groups deemed to be marginalized or part of an outcast society, by focusing on their beliefs, behavior, in those shared spaces. So let's just say that we mainly try to find an answer to the question why immigrants and LGBTQ groups seem to find it really difficult to interact peacefully in the same public space. To begin to understand the complexity of this topic, we needed to review some literature texts. We also conducted intensive and several one-to-one key interviews with many minorities, individuals, field surveys, and long-term visits to both streets. Now, Germany is the most populous country in the European Union, with an estimated population of around 84 million. It has 3 large cities with population over 1 million, Berlin, Munich, and Hamburg. Over 10 million living in Germany today were born outside of Germany. Around 21 million are with immigrant backgrounds. 15% of them came as asylum seekers, while 72% came from European countries led by Poland, Romania, and Italy for family or employment reasons. It is also considered the second most popular destination for immigrants in the world after the United States. Unlike in the past, in 2017, statistics showed that 83% of Germans are now in favor of same-sex marriages, while 16% are against. I also need to mention that 61% of Germans believe most Muslim immigrants want to be distinct from the larger German society, rather than adopting Germany's customs and way of life. Germany also has the second largest Muslim population in Europe at nearly 5 million people, which is expected to grow significantly in the coming decades. Now, what Monica Maron here says in this quote requires our attention. It clearly describes the way many Germans feel towards the societal transformation in Germany nowadays, which is their homeland. But since the mid of last century, Germany has become the new homeland for many other minorities. To achieve that sense of new homeland, immigrants and new minorities tend to turn some city spaces within the new habitat into enclaves that are defined as spatial junctures of different traditions. They try to comprise their ethnic society to fit within different spaces within the city. A concept that Lynch elaborated in his writings, that we know, regarding the way public space is being altered to fit ways of behaving, and simultaneously behaviors are changed to fit in given spaces. Now back to the map of Langerreihe and Steindam in the street. The city that can be defined as dynamic metrics in which physical spatial forms and symbolic social practices keep interacting with each other within a constant form of change, creating sometimes contested spaces between different groups of users. Conflicting uses of those spaces automatically raise issues related to territoriality that reflect the need of users to claim some geography as their own. And that's exactly what happened in the neighborhood of St. George. It is one of Hamburg's oldest districts, which has been a space for the marginalized, the immigrants, the social outcasts since its establishment. So it is really a unique district in that sense. It was, as we can see in the map here, was located outside of the city walls, and it began when they created this leprosy hospital where they sent all the cases to the hospital. They were not allowed to go back through the walls to the city, and they were even buried there. In this busy slide here, we can find the historical development of the district along the years since 1194 to today. Due to the time tightness, I won't be able to go through it all, but it is all clearly described and explained in the published papers, so please have a look at it. But to sum it up, I can say that this specific district went through milestone changes since its beginnings, stressing here that the fact that it was a district for the minorities, the marginalized, and the outcast. History shows us clearly that St. George went through dramatic cosine sine curve of societal and political changes till today, bouncing between rich and poor, poor and rich, that occupied the neighborhood due to the wars, plagues, Nazis, and so on. But I feel it is also important to mention that precisely in the mid of last century, the German authorities issued the Gastarbeiter program, allowing millions of skilled workers from Turkey, Spain, Italy, and Greece to come and help rebuild the country after the many wars. I should also mention that last century witnessed social acceptance of the LGBTQ groups, who found St. George to be the best medium for their community. And by the beginning of the millennium, new waves of immigrants came to Germany from the Middle East and North Africa, as well as South Africa, of course, and found refuge in St. George. Both groups are mainly concentrated in those two streets. And you can see here, both are close to the main train station, which played a major role in shaping both of them. Since the focus of this research is the relationship between the marginalized groups and the public space, the exploration of democratic nature of both of those spaces is of key importance. By characterizing Langerreihe and Steindam as public domains, the assumption is, of course, that they are accessible for everyone, and therefore constitutive of democracy, allowing for the other to be visible and accepted, no matter who is the other in that equation. Throughout the course of our investigations and visits to both streets, we distinguish between the different uses of their buildings and accordingly the type of visitors who target those spaces. Both differ in the way their inhabitants design their spaces to express their social identities. We also discovered that it is evident that cultural and economic diversity in both streets created a crossover of different characteristics that went under threat of dissipation due to the enormous increase in land value, which immediately attracted investors, urban planners, even the authorities to intervene and leave their prints on both streets. Due to the unique nature of both of them, our paper will use 4 parameters suggested by Alan Collins in 2004 in order to easily conceptualize the socio-spatial evolution processes of both of them along the years. We start with Langerreihe, a 1 kilometer long street with galleries, small, unique shops, cafes, bars, restaurants, sex shops are all lined up along this pulsing, colorful space. It is quite common to see same-sex couples hand in hand in trendy fashion and unique outfits. Rainbow flags are predominant in that street, and it is where the annual Hamburg Pride Parade starts. As we could see in the previous map, the street consists of two rows of stacked buildings. Some of them are rare half-timbered buildings that are, of course, listed among other buildings, which give it this charming atmosphere and unique architecture to the whole promenade in general. For a long time, they were occupied by poor immigrants from the LGBTQ community who could afford the low rents back then. By the 90s, a wave of affluent, young, single, childless LGBTQ individuals managed to afford the cost of rents and also to purchase and renovate some of its inexpensive buildings in Langaraya, of course, slowly replacing poor gay immigrants in that area. And of course, individual low-key shops, groceries, and small craft businesses have largely given way to the trendy cafes, to the exclusive shops, and to the expensive restaurants. Here, for example, in the middle, we can see this building that is called nowadays the burned house. The landlord wanted to evacuate its old residents who also rented the shops in the ground floor. But since the rent law doesn't allow impulsive evacuation of residents, he simply had the building set on fire. Shortly after failed investigations, he easily managed to renovate the building, rent the flats with higher rates, and even added 2 extra floors on the top. Quite disturbing, isn't it? Oh, and I have to say that this street is one of the most expensive 50 streets in the city. Slowly, the spatial configuration of that street was transformed into a vivid center of social, cultural, and political representations. The recent leniency in the German law and the societal acceptance for the LGBTQ community transformed Langaraya into a freedom zone where they could express their sexual identity openly in non-normative way without fearing the other. Just a few years ago, being gay was only spoken in private, and a public outing was often considered as a stigma. A fear of it was great among many men and women. Now people let down their guards and feel safe. The bars are the most attractive spaces in Langaraya. Once I see the pride flags hanging, I immediately let down my guard. It is when I feel safe to step in. Another quote, Langaraya is mainly visited by Europeans. You rarely see any Arabs there. My Arab friends even feel angry at Langaraya due to its reputation as a gay street. Also, they completely refuse to watch the annual Christopher Street Parade. Moving to Steindam now, a wide throughway full of loud vehicles combined between Oriental eateries, small groceries, and bedding shops. With large group of gathered young men, it is a common scene to see police performing some random checks, which gives a subjective feeling of insecurity to some of its visitors. Steindam Street was the first long paved street that was laid outside Hamburg's walls in 1539, and since 1890 it was developed into a main shopping street, and by the beginning of the 20th century 7 tram lines ran through it. During the Second World War, many of its buildings were bombed, and new modern high-rise office buildings and hotels occupied the vacant areas, which took away this old charm of the street. During the 80s and 90s, the street was dominated by Turkish and Afghani identities due to the second generations who started their own small businesses there. The Oriental shops were closely aligned with sex shops, sports betting kiosks, and casinos, which attracted many young men. It was also an open drug scene where people consumed drugs in the street. Passers-by got robbed by used syringes as weapons, and not to mention being the main center of prostitution due to the close proximity to the main station, of course. Since the excessive waves of refugees and asylum seekers hit Germany in 2015, Steindam slowly became controlled by the majority of Muslims coming from Turkey, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and other areas from the Middle East and North Africa. As you can see in this slide here, the street slowly became a hub of numerous halal meat shops, Oriental restaurants, and shisha cafes. Walking there, you get hit with this exotic mixture of smells that you can never get anywhere in Hamburg. Signage of some languages, letters, symbols define the street's boundaries. Just like in Langaraya and its rainbow flags, signage is an important element of streetscapes for ethnicity. But here, it even performs as a cushion for the first cultural shock and provides a familiar urban environment for the newcomers. The men behaved as if the space gave them some power of form. This is such a powerful statement, in my opinion. It clearly reinforced our findings of the street as an unfriendly space for the female minority. The street setting does not give women the chance to freely enjoy being there without feeling that men are watching them. Another minority to address here is the LGBTQ groups, which perceive the street as a space full of unnecessary harassments and verbal abuse once they are acknowledged as LGBTQ. They get catcalled by young men as well as prostitutes even, and bluntly get asked to leave the street. So far, we gave a glimpse on the gentrification both streets have witnessed, but there's also a philanthropic gentrification strongly taking place in recent years, a hybrid of both groups, the LGBTQ and the Muslim immigrants. Many LGBTQ asylum seekers originally fled their countries due to the constant threat of imprisonment on sodomy charges. Through our discussions with many Arab LGBTQ, we found that the majority comes from a family structure based on a complex of tradition and Islamic faith, where individuality is being sacrificed in order to maintain family cohesiveness, where honor, self-image, security, and identity are derived from the conservative family relationships. One gay man I met told me that he has to travel to Dresden, another city, in order to meet other gay men because he fears to be discovered here in Hamburg. And it is safer for him this way. And when I asked him, so what happened if you cannot travel? Then he said, well, virtual spaces and dating apps will do the job. This juxtaposition inspired us to come up with a spider graph based on the findings of our interviews and visits to both streets. We basically wanted to see how people perceive both streets, how they felt about them, and what it meant for them to have a safe, friendly, accessible, comfortable, and pleasant street as a public space. The results was somehow expected. If you look at the graph here, you can see that more or less Langeraya with the red line scores an average score on all aspects, not so high, not so low. Looking at Steindam, on the other hand, in the light blue, you can see that safety was highly criticized by the users. It didn't have a pleasant atmosphere to the majority, and accordingly, it wasn't a comfortable space to visit. Both streets, however, scored more or less the same when it came to accessibility and functionality due to their location. The topic of this research was very challenging. As you could see through my quick presentation, we needed to consider a multitude of aspects related to history, culture, socioeconomic, religion, and even sexual orientation in order to find possible answers for our question, why is it difficult for Muslim immigrants and LGBTQ groups to share the same public space? According to our gay interviewees, the Arab and Turks in Steindam choose to ignore the existence of the LGBTQ within their community. For them, it's a no-no option. And we could easily conclude that this was strongly derived from a religious reasoning. For the people in Langeraya, on the other hand, they didn't mind having Arabs there, but they just minded being stared at. It was also a no-no option for them to feel trapped in their own free zone. When we asked our sample what, in their opinion, would be the best way to get individuals from both streets to come together and interact, the majority said this can be difficult due to many cultural prejudices and layers of conservative thinking. But it was also interesting for us when we got the same answer from two males, one straight and one gay. They both suggested creating events, mediums, where people can only interact when they feel there's no need for them to explain themselves to anyone, when they can share something in common, something they are passionate about, like sports or social events. Only when people learn to see each other from a different perspective, only then they can learn how to accept each other. We need to promote spaces that ensure inclusivity for different groups, spaces that are safe for future generations without discrimination of any kind, spaces that are able to embrace the other and produce justice, safety, accessibility, and affordability in order to foster equality of life for everyone. We also need to address the issue of education. The more people become aware, the more they become open to accepting. I think that for a more accepting future for generations to come, there is a pressing need to start tracking and tracing the social and urban development of different minorities, in addition to reinforcing planning practices that can help generate active street spaces where people can become attached to them and even feel belonging and free to express themselves without falling under intolerant prejudices. Thank you for paying attention to this presentation.
Thank you, Vidor. That was wonderful. I really appreciate it. It's hard not to just immediately jump into questions. I feel like that's my my go-to, but I'm going to resist the temptation and wait until after. And I'd like to now invite Mohammed Al-Jasser to come up and give his presentation. While he is getting everything set up, I'd like to just add that, oh, there you go, got it.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Mohammed is a professor at Kuwait University, and I had the amazing experience of getting to be hosted by Kuwait University at the IASI 2016 event, in which he was able to host all of the conference there at the university. Very good.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this introduction. We had a really good conference. We enjoyed having IAST in Kuwait. So thank you. The presentation today it's a paper that was done by one of my former students and I. Actually, it's part of her research when she was a student with me and as a master's student. Originally, she was supposed to be presenting it today, but unfortunately, she couldn't be here. Her name is Mail Fassam, and I'll be presenting this instead. So the title of the presentation is Segregation Between Two Adjacent Spaces, a reflection of segregated society, the Salhia Plaza and Fahd Salim Street as a case study. For those who are familiar with Kuwait City is kind of it's inside this oval shaped, and our site is right where the circle. I don't know if my cursor is apparent, but it's right of my where the circle is. And the paper explores the dichotomy of two public spaces next to each other, yet separated by a wall of greenery, which also acts as a defining threshold between two different demographic users of public spaces. It investigates how the urban separation between the street and the plaza affect the sociocultural participation in the city. Fahd Salim Street, I'll just give a quick intro into the street and the plaza. Fahd Salim Street was one of the first major shopping streets to be developed in Kuwait in the 1950s after the modernization process. And it was part of the Minoprius, Spensley and McFarland's master plan. It was the destination of shopping for the Gulf region, and it lasted, and it was mixed with high-end and moderate type of shops, and it was very successful until the mid-80s. And so by the late 80s, early 90s, it started to decline, mainly due to the introduction of shopping malls, of course, kind of the story where almost every city center, faced, where the shopping mall just takes the main shops into the mall, and then it deprives the city center. So with its decline, a new demographic moved in, and it was mostly the lower income workers, either house helpers or industrial workers, but mostly characterized as low income. And that continued from the 90s until today. At the same time, this is Fahd Salim Street. The Salhiya Plaza, which is the image on the right side, is right at this corner. It's kind of not very clear here, but it's right at this corner. And it's a relatively newer project. It's developed in the about 20 years ago. And it was a joint venture between the Salhiya real estate company and the municipality. What's interesting is that the Salhiya Plaza, Salhiya Plaza kind of give its back to the street, to Fahd Salim Street, which is the main street in downtown Kuwait, completely give its back to it and opens up to a smaller street that connects directly to Salhiya Shopping Mall, or Salhiya Complex as it's called. A quick history about the location and the city. So the image, the upper left image is the beginning of Fahd Salim Street. If you see, this is the gate that was a continuation of the wall that protected the city. Of course, the wall was demolished and the gates were kept. However, this is the entrance of Fahd Salim Street. The red line is where the Salhiya complex is. And we're going to get back to this red line in a moment. And the green arrow is where the Salhiya Plaza right now is. At that time, it was a police station. The images on the left, on the right, are current images of Fahd Salim Street. So the drastic change from the 1950s and 60s to today. So what is Salhiya Complex? Salhiya Complex is one of the earliest luxury shopping malls that emerged in Kuwait. It was designed in the 1970s, designed and built in the 1970s, and by the Salhiya real estate company. Of course, the name Salhiya Real Estate Company took its name from this particular complex. And over the years, Salhiya Real Estate Company became very successful. And to be honest, they are one of the better real estate developers who actually do give public space to the city. Most real estate developers, they focus on the building themselves or the building itself, but Salhiya Real Estate Company does give part of its project to the city. However, we're going to look at the interesting phenomenon. The Salhiya Plaza, when they came to develop it, they had a problem. I'm going to go back to the previous image. If we go back to the red line, the Salhiya owners, they own both sides of the street. The red line is actually a connection between two different streets, and it's a small street, small alley. And they had a problem because the alley was it was part of the public domain, and they owned both sides of the bank, and they wanted to create a shopping mall. So they came into an agreement with the municipality to create a shopping mall and to enclose the street and becomes an enclosed pedestrian on the condition that they will not financially benefit from the middle part, so they cannot sell anything in the middle part. And hence, when you look at the building, the shopping mall is 3 floors, and then it becomes offices. Even as you go all the way up, the offices stays, the cavity or the courtyard continues all the way to the ceiling, where it's a glass ceiling. That's because they cannot create offices on top of the street. So that was kind of a compromise that happened between the Salhiya Real Estate Company and the municipality. Our site, the site of the investigation. Now we're going to look at the yellow shaded area is the Salhiya complex. The blue shaded area is the Salhiya Plaza. The red shaded area is Fahd Salim Street. And our interest is this threshold that's between Fahd Salim Street and Salhiya Plaza. The lower image, it's an image taken from Fahd Salim Street to the plaza. The plaza was designed in a way where you cannot see the plaza if you're walking on the street. It's deliberate. There is several thresholds that came in that prevents the viewer on the street from looking into the plaza. And it becomes this segregated barrier between the two. When May Al-Fassam came to me a few years ago when she was starting her master's thesis, she was arguing that segregation is the key to the successful story of the plaza. And I just disagreed that we shouldn't look at segregation as a successful story, you know, the whole idea that we want to integrate, we want to create more of an integrated society. And the fact that there's a successful story based on segregation doesn't mean that we have to celebrate it. However, her argument, and I agree right now with her argument, is that, well, there is a successful story. Let's look at why it's successful. Let's understand why the segregation creates success. And then let's try to work out how to create integration and keep the success. So the question that she was posing at the early stages of her research, does the urban separation between Fahd Salam Street and Salhiya Plaza contribute to the success of the plaza? And actually the more appropriate question would be why the urban separation contribute to the success of the plaza. We're gonna look quickly at the surrounding environment of the area. The area is combination between 1950s, 1960s, 1970s buildings, as well as contemporary buildings. Most of the buildings that you would see in this image are facing the Fahd Salam Street, the deteriorated street. With the exception of the lower right image, the small image, that's actually from the plaza facing the Salhiya complex. So the study focused on the concept of contrast in public spaces, the visible versus the invisible, the public versus the private, the inviting spaces versus the repelling spaces, and so on. If we look at the literature of public spaces, the success of public spaces, they all promote that to have a successful story, you have to have an integration. I mean, Kevin Lynch, you know, he says that urban open spaces are defined by publicly accessible open places and so on. If you look at most of the literature, that would be the narrative. Integration is the key to success. William White, the classic story of William White and New York, and how he looked at the successful small plazas and he realized the connectivity to the street, but at the same time, the element of identity that's kept to it, or the element of affordance, environmental affordance that's created to it. The research, the current research focuses on Jan Gale's work, specifically when he says that to assemble or disassemble, when he's talking about the contrasting concepts of arrangement of space, to assemble or disassemble, to integrate or segregate, to invite or repel, and to open or to close. So these became the basis for the study, for May Fassam's study. Quick look at the two different locations, the two different spaces. Again, the image on top is the looking at Salhiya complex from Salhiya Plaza. The image on the bottom is Fahd Salam Street. Major thing, or the major differences between the two, the Salhiya Plaza it's not owned, it's operated and maintained by a private enterprise, by a private company, while the street is by the municipality. So there is an element that, because it's a public space and it's maintained by the municipality, the negligence, the neglect, I should say, of maintenance, there's a low maintenance to the streets. Even the buildings, when they deteriorated, there is no regulations that forces the owners of the buildings to maintain, especially if this is a major street. So there are several problems with Fahd Salam Street that caused the deterioration. On the other hand, when we're looking at the Salhiya Plaza, it's maintained because it's private. It's private because they want to make sure that they have profits at the end of the year. This is a diagram that shows the separation. I'm going to show the shade. This is the shade. So on the left is the sidewalk and the streets, Fahd Salam Street. And then all of a sudden you have a huge buffer zone between the street, the sidewalk, and the plaza. And when the CEO of the Salhiya real estate company was interviewed by May, he emphasized that actually it was the deliberate attempt to segregate and separate. He said that I wanted to separate, I wanted to segregate the plaza to make it successful and to alienate part of the society. So he's not, I shouldn't say to alienate, but to attract certain segment of society. This is what they were targeting. But however, by attracting segment side of society, you're inevitably alienating another segment. That's just the natural. I mean, if I target certain segment, then by the nature of that definition, I'm also alienating a certain segment of society. What's interesting, the buffer is plants, water barrier, then plants and trees. It's almost like a fortification. Quick review over the mapping that was done by May. And I have to also say that at that time, when May started her project, I was teaching a research methods for undergraduate architectural research method course. And I asked the students if they wanted to volunteer as a project, so that it becomes an in-house or an in-class project that would be integrated between our class and the project that May was working on. And they did. I think we had 7 or 8 volunteers, and we trained them how to do surveys, how to do mapping, and how to collect field notes and field surveys. So the mapping, the first level of mapping is the uses of the buildings that are surrounding the square. So there's a lot of mixed use. There are a lot of some residential, some commercial, and some businesses that exist. Circulation, that's basic. I don't want to focus on it. So the major circulation of Fat Salm Street, it's a heavy traffic, but the minor traffic is on the other side, and that's where the access to the plaza is. This is what I want to focus on in terms of the mapping. When they did the green mapping, there's an intensive amount of greenery that actually holds the plaza. And this, if you're walking down the street and continuing west, actually east in this case, you wouldn't even notice the plaza. I mean, it's so enclosed that the only access, this is the Salhiya complex, the only access is from the Salhiya complex to the Salhiya Plaza right here. And I'm going to talk about why this project came about. The other mapping that was done is public gatherings. Where do people congregate? So of course, the Salhiya Plaza, because it's a plaza and does have restaurants and cafes, so there's a major congregation there with a different demographic than public area 1, public area 2, and public area 3. And we're going to go over these 3 public areas as well in the narrative. So now when we look at the images on the right side is of Salhiya Plaza. So well-maintained, fountains, greenery, and then you see the deteriorating buildings from the distance. On the left-hand side are the number 3 and 2 public spaces from this previous slide. But this is public area number 2 and public area number 3. If we go back, this is the condition of public area number 2 and number 3. What's going on in Salhiya Plaza. So it's a drastic contrast, and one is well maintained, the other one is not maintained at all. Then there was the interviews. So when the students were trained, they were grouped into 3 different areas, or they were distributed to 3 different areas or zones. Zone number 1, which is ABC, zone number 2, and then zone number 3. Zone number 1, it's interesting. Most people who go to zone or who were interviewed in zone number 1, they were transient going across the street to catch up the buses. Right where B is, it's a major bus station. It's the second, I think it's the second largest bus station in Kuwait, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a lot of workers, a lot of low-income workers. They use the public transportation, so they're on the run to go to this area. Zone number 2 tend to be more outdoor open spaces that are used by also workers, expats mostly. And zone number 3, it's used by local Kuwaitis or expats, but financially able or affluent expats. So there's the demographic change is mostly governed by the financial abilities of the individual, but it also does have a cultural diversity, and we're going to look at the differences in the cultural diversity. So when we looked at zone number 1, which is the pink one, the most, and this is where I want to focus, the most difficulty that the researchers, when they were collecting the data, had was that people in that zone were running quickly, so they didn't want to chat, but also they didn't speak neither Arabic nor English. They spoke only their native languages. And it's mostly Bengalis, Filipinos, Hindi from India, as well as Urdu from Pakistan. But Urdu, Pakistanis are, this is not their main hub, but there is a good amount of Pakistanis in this area. But it's mainly Filipinos, Bengali and Indians that congregate in this area. So students had difficulty collecting information, yet they were able to collect some. When we go to zone number 2, people are a little bit more relaxed here because they are, it's a public squares or public plazas. They are deteriorated, but still it's a place where you would bring a sandwich and eat it. There was also a language barrier. People did not communicate neither in Arabic nor in English. English in general is the second language in Kuwait, so it's usually commonly used in public places. But in this zone, there were not many people who spoke fluent English or Arabic. While in zone number 3, which is the square or the plaza, Sahia Plaza, the main challenge was not the language. They both, they spoke either English or Arabic fluently. The problem was they were not interested to participate in the study. I don't want to say that it's snobby attitude, but people who go there, they want to go and enjoy their coffee or their dining. And the last thing they want is a student coming to their table and asking them, can you take a few minutes from your time? Still, we managed to get enough data. There was difficulty, and it took several weeks of collecting information, the data, but we managed to get some data. The data analysis focused on 5 items: location and access within Kuwait City and the surrounding urban components, ownership of space, both ownership of the operation and the sense of ownership that the individual, using the space, usage of spaces and the type of activities that takes place in them, physical separation between the 2 spaces, the nature of this physical separation, and the contrasting behavior. And if we have time toward the end, I'll talk more about anecdotal stories of the behavior that kind of emerged between the 2 sides. I'm going to go, the conclusion is the main thing. I'm going to go quickly to the conclusion and then focus on a couple of points. So the contrasting ownership between the private and the public, we kind of talked about it, sets the first division among these spaces. One is operated and owned by private enterprise, while the other are not owned, operated, while the other one is more public. The authority in power decides the way facilities are managed. And this is something that needs to be paid attention, because sometimes that's what happens. Okay, so I have 3 minutes. Thank you. Studying the physical separation, I'm gonna, between the plaza and the street. Both plaza and the street were found inviting to a limited group of people. So they are not inviting to all segments of societies. Workers are very intimidated to go into the plaza, and those who go to the plaza are intimidated to go to the street. And why I can't go to the next slide. Okay, here we go. So the visible versus the invisible. When we interviewed people on the street, 65% said they don't realize that there's a plaza behind the wall or behind the greenery. They don't see it. While when we did interview from the other side, the users of the plaza, they had the same answer, more or less, that they don't see the street. There was another question that we asked them: would you like to have access to the plaza? I mean, to the street. What's interesting is the people who use the plaza, they said they don't see the street and they don't want to see the street, but they don't mind to have an access to the street. Kind of a very, it's like, I don't want to see you, but I want to make sure that I control your area. It's almost like the entitlement. I'm entitled, I live and I have a power. I need to have access to your domain, but I don't want to see your domain. Which is kind of interesting. I think it needs this kind of these notes, these anecdotal things needs to be further investigated. So what makes the plaza successful is the fact that it is segregated. It's the fact that it attracts locals as well as expats, but who do not want to mingle with other communities. There's a problem with segregation in the society in Kuwait, and it's not something recent. It started probably in the 50s and 60s, but it probably became more prominent in recent times. So the plaza is kind of a micro example of the society at large, this segregation of society. It does have its roots from the early stages of the modernization. I do have 1 minute. So the end of the research was to try to give recommendations of how to integrate, yet maintain what makes the plaza successful, the idea of the privacy, as well as what makes the accessibility possible, the idea of bringing the two communities together. If we have time toward the end of the discussions, I'll probably bring up some of the anecdotal stories that we heard from the people we interviewed in both the plaza and the street. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Jasser. And unfortunately, I only had your co-author who didn't attend bio up, so it took me a second. I wasn't prepared, so I just wanted to take a minute while you're changing out and just acknowledge you've been a great contributor to the conference. Dr. Mohammed Khalid Al-Jasser is an assistant professor of architecture at Kuwait University. Previously, Al-Jasser worked at Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research and as an intern at Pedler Thorpe of Walker of Sydney, Australia. He's currently at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign as a visiting scholar working on 2 research projects. The first is the physical and virtual social spatial identity of Arab American immigrants. And the second is gentrification of historic markets and its impact on identity in the age of neoliberalism. And Dr. Al-Jasser is going to give another presentation on one of his papers in session A8, which is happening on Friday or tomorrow.
Yeah, so just one minor correction. When I submitted the long time ago, I thought that we're going to present this last year, which I was in sabbatical. So I'm no longer in sabbatical at Illinois, but I'll be talking about part of the research of sabbatical tomorrow, hopefully.
Very good, very good.
So just a minor correction. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for your patience. All right, I'll invite Alireza up to get his presentation loaded. And while he does that, I would like to take a moment to introduce him. Alireza graduated with a Bachelor of Science from Iran University of Science and Technology and a master's from the University of Tehran with degrees in architecture. Alireza is a PhD researcher at the University of Kassel. He currently holds a doctoral scholarship from the Studentenstiftung des Deutsch Volks. I'm bad at this. Was that all right?
It was a good attempt.
That's a nice way of saying no. Why don't you correct me? What is it? What is the scholarship from?
Studienstiftung des Deutschen Volkes.
Yeah, you do it way better. He's currently conducting his PhD under the supervision of Philip Oswalt, and he investigates the role of Instagramming in reshaping the socio-political space in Iran through interaction with the urban space and spatial devices of control and suppression. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Alireza.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction. What I'm going to present now is a chapter of my dissertation. And because it's not finalized yet, I look forward to your comments, your questions, and your critiques afterwards. Yeah. The Iran-Cambodia football match on the 10th of October 2019 was not a consequential meeting. However, it became a historical event because it was the first time since the establishment of Islamic Revolution that women were allowed to buy tickets for themselves to watch a men's football game in stadium. This event happened after 4 decades of ban and years of debate and conflict between different groups of people and authorities, arguing for and against the participation of women in male athletic events. In this study, I will investigate the role of Instagramming in the course of the event. To do so, a set of Instagram images produced by the women spectators will be examined as spatial representations and acts. The visual content of the collected Instagram posts, complemented with captions, will reveal the ways in which the participants have formed varieties of relationships with their surroundings in the event. The analysis of Instagram images is based on the notion of the performativity of the constitution of space, according to which space is continuously constructed by human bodies through the relationships they make with other bodies, objects, and places. The relationships, which are in fact the acts performed by human bodies, can be categorized in 4 groups of expressions, positions, interactions, and transformations. According to this framework, acts can transform existing spatial orders and elements or create new ones. So, in order to examine a social event, I inquire if acts of expression, position, and interaction lead to transformation or not. With respect to the performativity of the construction of space, I assume images can reconstruct spaces in two ways. Firstly, they represent bodies, objects, and places, and some of the relationships between them as image spaces. And secondly, they reconstruct the relationships between the generators of the image and the space represented in the image, which I call image acts. On this basis, the visual analysis sets out to read the Instagram images to reveal image spaces and image acts reconstructed by the women. The questions addressed by the analysis of images can be formulated this way. 1. What are the image spaces produced by women spectators in their Instagram images? And 2. What types of image acts are performed by women spectators through their images? Since the establishment of the Islamic regime in Iran in 1979, there has been a long background of exclusion, discrimination, and resistance, which has made stadiums spaces of conflict, protest, and defiance for Iranian women. Here, for the sake of time saving, I just address a recent episode of this history. On the 9th of September 2019, Sahar Khodayari, a woman who was arrested in an attempt to enter Azadi football stadium, set herself on fire in front of a court in Tehran. Reportedly, she self-immolated after she was told by a court employee that she might face 6 months prison time. While hospitalized, she became known as the Blue Girl because of the jersey color of her favorite team. After a few days, she died of her injuries. Her tragic death ignited a round of anger amongst Iranians as well as protests abroad. After the Blue Girl's death, FIFA urged the Football Federation of Iran, or FFIRI, to let women enter stadiums, emphasizing, quote, our calls on the Iranian authorities to ensure the freedom and safety of any women engaged in this legitimate fight to end the stadium ban on women in Iran. The FFIRI was requested by FIFA to prepare a timeline to sell tickets to women for the upcoming qualifiers. On the 10th of October 2019, in Iran's World Cup qualifying match against Cambodia, for the first time after 40 years, tickets for a football match were officially sold to women to attend a men's football contest in Azadi Stadium in Tehran. However, only 4 sections out of 71 sections of the stadium were allocated to women spectators, totaling approximately 3,500 out of 78,000 seats. Before looking into the Instagram images, let's take a quick look at image spaces created by official and semi-official news outlets, which reported the women's attendance with an abundance of photographs portraying blissful women of different social and age groups. The stress of the juxtaposition of women with loose and complete hijab suggests that the event enjoyed a peaceful space of unity of people of varying socio-political groups. Interestingly, the photographs hide any indication of conflict relating the event and its background. The photographs neither indicate the limiting borders of women's area, nor reveal nor reveal the tiny proportion of women to the whole empty sitting area of this stadium. The way of framing generates an image space in which the entirety of the stadium is filled with women. The statements made by the Iranian government officials corresponded with this image space, reinforcing the image of a successful event organized by the government in a perfect way, denying any foreign influence or obligation. Masoud Soltanifar, the then Minister of Sports and Youth, claimed that the attendance of women in this stadium was the will of the state government and people. A viral video on Telegram and Twitter depicts a physical confrontation between women spectators and female police forces. It shows a woman raising a handwritten placard surrounded by other spectators saying, "The blue girl of Iran, your name has been immortal." The woman is cheered on by the others around her, encouragingly clapping and shouting, "Blue girl." This scene indicates that acts of commemoration of the blue girl would be forcefully stopped by the police. Dissimilar from the image spaces produced by online news outlets, suggesting that the whole stadium crowded with female spectators, an Instagram image posted by a man spectator displays not only the small proportion allocated to women, but it is demonstrated the distance arranged between men and women in the stadium. So the image represents the restriction and segregation exerted over women by the event organizers. In the caption, it is mentioned the apparently small point I'm pointing at is very big indeed, as big as the expanse of all women who have to fight hundreds of times harder than men for gaining their basic rights. This selfie video portrays a woman waving an Iranian flag while wearing a flag hat and armbands and even being wrapped in flag scarf. Other women around her in the video are holding national flags too, and they are singing along a patriotic song which is played by the stadium's loudspeakers. This example shows two interesting points. First, the fact that how well the act of image making resonates with acts of fandom. Second, the video demonstrates that through the performance of such image acts, women can form images of football fans of and for themselves. Further examples show how image acts can help articulate one's position within and towards the stadium and shape the mode of participation in the event. In a post by Mahtab Qolizadeh, a journalist, we see her in the first part sitting apparently at home, and then in the second part, standing in front of the stadium's gate. In the first part, she condemns the government's humiliating behaviors of fencing off women and separating them from men. Criticizing the scarce number of tickets allocated to women, she states that although she has a ticket, she will not enter until all women are able to freely attend stadiums. In the second video, she displays herself standing in front of the stadium's gate with a sorrowful face, clenching her lips as if holding her tears back. As mentioned, she wants to stand with the women who have not been given the opportunity to enter the stadium. Another interesting selfie depicts a woman's face from a low angle with an overexposed background. The white vacuum in her background gives the impression that she has been entirely detached from the event space. In the caption, she declares that she is not a football fan, however, to fight for women's freedom and to preserve the right of spectatorship, she attended the stadium. Ironically, in order to protect her right as a member of the large group of women, she has performed a highly isolating image act, which has completely separated her from the others. Another selfie, which portrays two women cheering together with others, has the caption stating that they are real football fans, since they are in the stadium merely for the sake of watching the game without having any political agenda. These three examples indicate that women participants have defined three types of position in relation to the event through the performance of image acts, namely political participation, non-political participation, and non-participation. It is noteworthy that the images which reconstruct non-political types of participation include more concurrence with the event in the stadium. And by contrast, the other two types of political positions, which are acts of resistance, entail self-detachment and seclusion. Whereas explicit attempts to commemorate the Blue Girl would encounter the police intervention, a number of Instagram posts have been dedicated to her memorialization. This image portrays a woman standing alone in the stadium's passageway, having on a shirt with a blue heart print on it with the title of Blue Girl, both in Farsi and English. The caption reads, this moment is 1,000 times to you. There is another post showing a woman carrying a long strip of paper in front of her face while sitting around the others on the stage. The handwritten message on the paper is, Blue Girl, wish you were here. And it is mentioned in the caption that the slogan was written by Lipstick. These examples demonstrate how the performance of image acts has offered an alternative way of commemoration by seeking to address people who are outside the event with the hope to reach audiences later. The analysis demonstrates that through their images, women spectators expressed themselves as football fans, defined their various positions in relation to the stadium, and circumvented the controlling force. Image acts substituted the problematic act of raising placards in commemoration of the Blue Girl with alternative covert acts of protest, which were mostly individual. Interestingly, image acts place strong emphasis on the present time and place, detached from any inspiring resistance history or without leading to any plan for mobilizing social campaigns in the future. While Instagramming encouraged the participants to give prominence to their national and fan identity, it precluded them from looking critically to their situation. The findings demonstrate that the use of Instagram intensified the unorganized and fragmented characteristics of women's movement in Iran. Looking back to the performative framework of the constitution of space, it is time to see what types of transformations are made through the acts of expression, position, and interaction reconstructed by the Instagram images. The event itself features a powerful transformative dimension because it marks a historical moment when a man-dominated space opens to female participants, and it offers a hope that the opening continues and recurs in other cities across the country. Through first-hand, personalized, and dramatized documentation of the event, this transformative mood has attached itself to the imaged acts. In other words, imaged acts in this event have produced a sense of participation in a transformative moment. Nevertheless, considering the fact that no collective mechanism or organization has been created to follow up on the issue of women's right to spectatorship, in fact, nevertheless, considering the fact that no collective mechanism or organization has been created to follow up on the issue of women's right to spectatorship, in fact, no enduring transformative acts has been performed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Alireza. That was really stimulating. All right. We have one more presenter that we would like to bring up. Felipe, would you like to go ahead and, there you go, get your presentation loaded? While you do that, I would like to just introduce you to the group. Dr. Felipe Lanuza is a research fellow at the Center for Architecture, Urbanism, and Global Heritage at Nottingham Trent University. Experiences of absence in the built environment are Felipe's research focus to build up alternative understandings and representations of urban change and to inform design thinking. He's disseminated and exhibited his research internationally, and his teaching has covered interior design, architecture, urban landscape design, as well as architectural history and theory. He's a co-founder of DLA Scan Architectural Studio and an associate at Urban Transcripts. His presentation is titled Between the Palimpsests and the Blank Slate, Reimagining Tradition and Erasure and the Regeneration of Burgess Park and the Aylesbury Estate, South London. So with that, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay, for introducing me, and thank you all for your interests. Can you see my screen? I'll try to go in full screen mode.
Yep, we can see it.
Do you see it in full screen now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, sorry, one tiny mistake. We'll start from the beginning, right?
Okay.
There you go. Do you see it now? Good.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. So, and thank you to IST for having me in this conference. Well, Burgess Park and the Aylesbury Estate sit next to each other, just a few blocks south from the Elephant and Castle in Southwark, South London. The Aylesbury, on the northwest of the highlighted area, is a modernist council estate that once consisted of around 2,400 dwelling units. It is now subject to a contentious regeneration project to be completed in 2036. Whilst Burgess Park, to the southeast, consists of 56 hectares of recently revamped green areas and a variety of amenities. The regeneration of the Aylesbury is usually discussed and criticized from the most pressing angles: gentrification, dispossession, how it affects social and cultural diversity, yet the debates are mostly circumscribed to the site itself. I observed the Aylesbury estate from the perspective of its overlooked relation to Burgess Park, to show how both sides determine and reflect each other, showing also different attitudes and discourses in how they engage, or not, with traditional or pre-existing architecture, city-making and culture. The narratives underpinning the current regeneration of the Aylesbury estate make little mention to Burgess Park, yet this iconic image of the new development shows it in seamless continuity with it, as if they were part of one single project. The planning documents of the Aylesbury's regeneration show that recent improvements to Burgess Park formed part of the overall regeneration strategy. Southwark Council envisioned the park, at that point largely neglected, as an opportunity to increase the land value so to support and enhance the regeneration of the whole Aylesbury area. The park's renovation is widely regarded as positive, in contrast to the more controversial and seemingly unrelated demolition and replacement of the Aylesbury estate. Burgess Park and the Aylesbury estate are products of modernist post-war planning, but their design and execution differed greatly. The open space we know today as Burgess Park was proposed in the County of London plan by Abercrombie and Forshaw in 1943 and was slowly and fragmentarily built from the 1950s onwards, replacing old terraced houses and factories that developed associated to the west end of the Grand Surrey Canal. Considering the future presence of the park and the poor quality of most of the building stock in the area, the Aylesbury was erected between 1967 and 1977 on the north side of the park, after clearing most of the pre-existing Victorian buildings in the site. Although the Aylesbury was adjusted to existing buildings considered as in good condition, it appeared mostly as a series of uncompromising modernist slabs of different heights sitting on a cleared ground. The green open spaces of Burgess Park on the right were linked up just in the early 1980s. Several pre-existing, yet to be cleared buildings lingered for many more years, contributing to a sense of incompleteness to the park. The prefabricated concrete architecture of the Aylesbury and its urban layout, conceived by Felix Trenton and a team of architects of the London Borough of Southwark, exemplified the idea of the modernist blank slate and separate circulations for cars and pedestrians, which along with linear slabs of different heights marked a stark difference with the traditional Victorian terraced buildings and most of the architecture that characterized the area. The initial projects for Burgess Park did not conform to the post-war modernist design principles, but responded to more romantic visions of landscape design, and were never developed beyond the initial draft stage. Later versions were more pragmatic and less adventurous, having to negotiate with an increasing number of buildings that had to be kept within its area, and the pressures of completing a park after many years of the works being initiated. Burgess Park had thus a piecemeal development. It was an additive result of incomplete erasures and partially executed projects, implemented across 6 decades, until the phased regeneration of the area comprising both sites began in 2010. One thing in common, however, is the lack of adequate maintenance and investment in both sites from the 1980s onwards, affecting the communities that lived there and in the surroundings. After allowing the estate to go into disrepair, the authorities' argument was that the buildings could no longer be renovated, so they had to demolish and replace them. The lack of resources for adequate maintenance of the modernist council estates was often an issue across the UK, yet some critics often blamed on architecture and urban design for the failure, as is the case of the well-known Prut-Igoe in the USA. An episode of the British forensic drama Silent Witness used the Aylesbury as a backdrop for a story of gangs, drugs and murders. It was filmed a couple of years before the regeneration began. Such appearance reflects a negative perception of modernist architecture and planning in general, and the Aylesbury estate in particular, adding to other media narratives as noted by Ben Camkin, which are not grounded in reality, yet help to consolidate a sink estate reputation useful to justify its replacement. Moving from appearances in popular visual culture to the on-site experience, the strong presence of the Aylesbury high-rise slabs used to characterize the open spaces of Burgess Park without overwhelming it, aligning perpendicularly to it, marking its north limit and reflecting the estate's spatial structure as if to canalize the urban flows into the park. On a more local level, Burgess Park reveals its palimpsest-like quality as it keeps elements of its previous configurations. Some of them are recognizable and cared for structures dating from the site's industrial past, like the lime kiln that was located next to the canal, which is today a footpath that structures the park like a spine. The lime kiln and this pedestrian bridge that used to cross the Grand Surrey Canal are examples of recognizable landmarks of Burgess Park inherited from the past of the site and integrated into its current scheme. They encompass the historical identity of the park. Beyond the materialization and staging of history in the built environment, however, Burgess Park retains other, subtler traces of fragments of its past configurations. Can I say more subtle instead of subtler? Yeah, that might be easier. Anyway, these are often overlooked and not considered as of heritage status. These traces are like loose ends, partly erased reminders and partially realized projects that are in the park but at the same time left over, not integrated into it. Beyond the self-evident presence of historical objects, these traces scattered across the park appear like question marks about its past. They offer a more open experience of the park's memory, marked by strangeness and absence, stimulating retrospective and prospective imagination. These loose ends introduce a degree of vagueness, in the sense in which Cristallia Canvasino rereads Ignacy de Sola Morales' notion of the terrain vague, to describe a model of open green spaces based on land left over from the mainstream overly controlled urban activity. Over sites left unplanned, and therefore subject to open interpretation, and sometimes, as is the case of this redundant street, allowing space for unstructured, more spontaneous use. But the implementation of a new design in 2010 and its subsequent updates seeks to gain coherence and legibility, I quote, in the park, disregarding these loose ends. These comparatively small erasures, along with improvements to the park, are not only a contrasting parallel to the regeneration of the Aylesbury estate taking place in the backdrop, but are instrumental and integral to it. The traces and fragments that can still be found in the park refer us to absences, like this redundant street, not yet cleared. The streets, factories and houses that are not there anymore, but can be reimagined, revealing the mnemonic depth of the place, as Sébastien Marot will define it. They strangely reflect absence as it comes through in the Aylesbury estate, which can hardly be regarded in such positive terms, however. The Aylesbury, arranged in several blocks enclosing green spaces and containing a number of public facilities, is set to disappear completely in the coming years, according to the regeneration plans. Academics like Jane Rendell, Loretta Leys, and Ben Campkin have criticized its regeneration and further engaged in its defense, presenting the negative impacts of the regeneration on disadvantaged people and communities across the area. Because of its vast scale, the Aylesbury features still occupied buildings awaiting demolition, buildings vacated and being demolished, as well as new developments already in use. In Burgess Park, loose ends are tightened up, moving away from the qualities of a vague park to conform to the socially restrictive and culturally reductive new dwellings replacing the Aylesbury. Instead of acknowledging the potential value of modernist design whilst blaming on it for the Aylesbury stigmatization, the developers argued for returning to an idealized and simplified traditional layout of streets and squares, as well as buildings inspired in the typical Victorian and Georgian architecture of places like Mayfair in London, but with a contemporary touch. The narrow architecture of the New London vernacular appears as a safe move for the success of the economic operation underpinning the whole regeneration of the area. The new scheme replacing the Aylesbury thus pleads for returning to traditional forms, whilst repeating the modernist strategy of large-scale demolition to establish a radically new setting. These actions further imply the dispossession and displacement of vulnerable people. The interventions in Burgess Park, on the other hand, seek to add richness and coherence, preserving some industrial landmarks only to discard most of the traces left of previous configurations, flattening the mnemonical depth of the site and diminishing its values as a vague park. Burgess Park, therefore, offers a privileged position to witness the simultaneous decay, demolition and regeneration of the Aylesbury, whilst at the same time prompting it and changing itself along to it. In turn, The looming absence of the Aylesbury echoes the homes cleared away to build Burgess Park across the second half of the 20th century, an absence not acknowledged in any of the heritage buildings and structures across the park, but only possibly evoked through overlooked reminders, most of which are being silently removed. In the half-evicted and half-demolished Aylesbury estate, displaced residents and demolished buildings reflect what is left aside from the regeneration-led future of the site, whilst the palimpsest of the disparate writings forming Burgess Park are narrowly reconfigured into an all-encompassing scheme. Beyond considering absence as a condition to be encountered in sites, objects and traces that are left over from the development of a city, I explore absence's agency in understanding and representing urban change. The method I use to convey absence is layering, addressing absence's evocative capacity to suggest multiple, simultaneous, and distant presences in the memory and imagination of the perceiver, following its meaning of being away, either physically or temporally. By means of variable degrees of transparency, these overlaid photos of the Aylesbury reflect an environmental impression and the fragility of a site on the verge of disappearance. As new imaginations of the urban, they respond to Jennifer Robinson's plea for following Walter Benjamin in developing, I quote, critiques intended to displace given or dominant meanings through critical attentiveness to alternative interpretations, and latent or coexisting possibilities. Other possible futures of the past, caught in the ruins of the city, other possible futures to be made now through critical engagements with modernity. End quote. In an exhibition that took place in 22 Gordon Street at the Bartlett School of Architecture in Bloomsbury in London, I used photography and I expanded to videos, sound recordings, texts, and objects collected on site to bring about absence as it comes through in the relation between Burgess Park and the Aylesbury estate. I will discuss two of the pieces exhibited, perhaps relevant in the context of this conference. So let's see how it goes with this. Well, first, a piece made with footage I took in Burgess Park and the Aylesbury estate, a looping pair of multi-layered video compositions running in parallel, in two different screens. I will leave this video running for a minute and then carry on to finalize this presentation. The idea of the sound is also to be faint, to be subtle, so don't worry if it wasn't too loud. But I hope you could hear a bird or a passing conversation. Anyway, let's move on. Well, a leaseholder kindly allowed me to take some still videos in his flat, which I used to make a composition combining them with still videos that I shot in the park. The flats in the Aylesbury are light and spacious, often with great views, but these qualities do not feature in more widespread negative representations of the estate. In their intimacy, a sense of absence in the face of demolition and displacement is more poignant. The interior of the flat frames the views outside, which blend with overlaid videos of open spaces in Burgess Park. The absence of the Aylesbury corresponds to the absence of the park in the experience of people who have to move away, pushed by the regeneration. The absence of the park comes through the blending, vanishing videos of a place that sometimes seems present, but sometimes seems a memory difficult to grasp from a home that will disappear if the regeneration of the Aylesbury estate carries on forward. The second piece I will refer to here is composed of alternating passages of unstructured interviews to people living near Burgess Park, but not in the Aylesbury. The interviews were done whilst walking around the park, an in-situ conversation. The sequence is laid out in two lines that hold coherence in a linear way, as well as holding an open dialogue with the other line. Visitors could read only a limited amount of words of each line before moving to the next point, so their reading merges both lines in an open-ended way. Various images and objects collected on site were placed close to the text, like documents relating to it in different ways. All interviewees valued the cultural diversity of the area, to a great extent coming from migrants living or having lived in the Aylesbury estate, who still expressed their identities in the park. The Carnaval del Pueblo, in Spanish for People's Carnival, the greatest Latin festival in Europe, was held in Burgess Park in many occasions, being the last one in 2016. Whilst not holding any direct relation with London's traditional architecture or culture, the Aylesbury estate gave place to a great social and cultural diversity across decades, defining a strong sense of place for which the presence of Burgess Park was key. Absence is often a motif of commemoration or is used to vindicate what has been obliterated by or erased from dominating histories and practices shaping the built environment. Absence can be a term of resistance, as well as reflecting creative potential and an open sense of memory, as seen in the loose ends of Burgess Park. A commodified and simplified sense of tradition comes forward in the Aylesbury estate's regeneration, which will stand in the absence of the bearers of tradition of different and sometimes distant places, people who has been forced to move away, or is being forced to move away. There is an ethical contradiction in giving value to architecture inspired in tradition and replacing architecture that is not considered traditional, again, but became the holder of diverse traditions that are likely to disappear as that area gentrifies with the years. We architects are always prompted to produce new proposals, but usually the underlying socio-political contracts remain unchanged. With the demolition of the Aylesbury still far from complete, I intend my work to contribute as an alternative imaginary to urban regeneration, to account for what has been, in the sense proposed by Walter Benjamin, and to protect what remains of it as the promise of a not yet vanished alternative future. And here I want to, since I have a minute or so left, to recall a quote by Andreas Huyssen about modern ruins or modern architecture which is derelict, which is the case of the Aylesbury, that they communicate a sense of nostalgia because they are the image of a promise that couldn't be made or couldn't be made real. So I think that kind of utopian vision is also is still present as well in the images I'm trying to put together in a way as a sort of memory, as a sort of, let's say, to counter the discourses and narratives underpinning the regeneration, and in a way trying to I don't know, to make something about that, and in the hope that things can be reverted in some way. I think that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Felipe. We really appreciate that. We had such a great collection. This was amazing. If you guys would like to ask your questions in the chat box, we can start that. I'm going to invite all of the presenters to come up and be on video, and I'll add them to the spotlight here. Thank you all. All right, so I've got a list of questions for everybody, but I invite everybody who is a participant on this panel to ask questions as well. I think that the discourse and the back and forth is one of the best things we have about the conference. In a way, kind of especially after listening to everybody's presentation, I feel like the title could have been something more about how, because I think there was definitely a lot of linkages between all the presentations, and the title could have been more about this idea of how different user types and different behaviors are negotiated in public space. It seems like all of the presenters really had a focus and emphasis on whether it was formal public spaces like the parks that Felipe just talked about, or whether it was the street as a means of conveyance, as Bador had said, or if it's even more formal identified public space like Alareza's stadium. But this idea of how are different types of people and different actions within public space negotiated, filtered, and used, and how is the virtual supporting, inhibiting, or even modifying that type of use. So I'm gonna start with Bador, kind of noting that about the virtual. Can you help us reconnect the work that you presented to the theme of virtual traditions?
Yeah, I think it's more clear in the published paper or the paper itself, but since you say that, the connection would be in the last part in my presentation when I talked about this hybrid category between the immigrants and the LGBT community. This group of people, because they don't feel safe anywhere and because they cannot express themselves, they find refuge in virtual spaces. So instead of meeting in physical spaces, their safe space or their haven will be the chat rooms, the dating apps, and this sort of virtual space. This is where they get to express themselves freely, they get to meet other people, and they get to date other people and form a new connection with somebody. I also found that even not just the immigrants with LGBT orientation, but also not just the immigrants, I mean, but also the German young generations who couldn't find the courage to come out. They also find refuge in these virtual spaces. So for them, it's a space where they get accepted and they don't have to express themselves. So for that category, it is somehow easier to say that this virtual space is what we need to look at, and we need to redefine that space, and we need to study it and see how can we learn from it in order to create a safer space into the physical environment. What is missing in the physical environment that they can find in these virtual spaces and rooms, and how to integrate that small group of people or that minority to integrate within the bigger society or the bigger group or the bigger picture. That's how we found in our paper.
That's great. I think that's really interesting. And it kind of strikes me in a way, Alareza, that you might have found similar things. Do you kind of second what Bador said, that the virtual became a space where people who didn't feel like their behaviors were accepted in the physical were able to represent their anticipations, their hopes, their desires, that might change? Do you want to expand on her point?
Actually, in my study, as I explained, there are some media related acts connected to virtual spaces, which are done in the context of physical spaces, and this was the category of acts that I'm interested in, and we saw that maybe in some of my examples, for example, there are some alternatives, some acts that I can do, and at the same time connect to some virtual options and possibilities, but I'm still here in the physical context, and can do something that later will find its audience. But at the same time, I'm here. But maybe I'm doing something which is less obvious or maybe less dangerous.
Very good, very good. I'm gonna stick with Bador again and ask you to elaborate on what made the street as an environment more or less safe in its use, kind of regardless of sexual orientation, and more as it relates to that physical space?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the structure of both streets, one of them is really wide. It lacks a lot of human scale in there. This is the Steindam one. It's full of loud cars and horns and loud music of young men. The street itself forces the person, the one who walks there. Say, for example, I'm a woman and I really, really don't enjoy walking there. I even felt last time I visited, when I walked, I started watching how I walk in the street. What am I wearing? Who is looking at me and who's looking at me from my back? And that didn't feel good. And I live in Germany now, and it completely doesn't feel safe for me. And no one did anything. It's just the feeling. It's just the staring. It's just the same way I used to see men in Egypt gazing at women. My apology if I offend anyone, but this is the reality. In Langeray, on the other hand, it is a cozy street. It's filled with settings that give you this feeling of comfort. If you walk in the street, it is very tight, it's very tiny, but then you walk there and then you can share smiles with people and they give you back a smile. They're exchanging smiles with you. Do this in Steindam. No one is responding to you. For them, it's you're not even allowed to smile. And maybe that's why, maybe because I'm a female, maybe that's why I started getting interested in this topic, because it completely felt weird to me that they are both so close in proximity, but at the same time completely different. And it's annoying. It's completely annoying for me. I'm just very passionate about it. Yeah. So I think the physical settings play a big role in feeling safe in the street, the way people perceive the street, the way, regardless of gay or no gay, or what kind of sexuality or minority you are. Just walk. Even the other sample of interviews, the German men themselves, they said they don't feel comfortable walking in Steindam because of the Arabs and immigrants there. They look at them as if they are the outsiders, so they're not welcome in the street. So not just the physical settings, but also the behavior of the people. Langeray, the people are very nice. They don't care. You just go there, sit, have your coffee, have your beer, and go do some shopping and leave. You're free to do whatever you want, as long as you don't poke my bubble of privacy, you know? But if you go to Steindam, it's our space, it's our territoriality. You're not allowed. And it is in Germany. And the Germans are not feeling safe there. It doesn't feel just for me.
That's really interesting. It's very good.
It makes sense.
We have at least 2 points. Mark, was your comment on what Badur just said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then we've got May, so will be next.
Well, gorgeous graphics, Badur. I mean, all of these were fantastic. Philippe, I loved yours as well. So thanks for spending the time on making the graphics attractive. But I'm curious, if these are in fact in a similar location with similar demographic, we have to be careful about architectural determinism. Is it the architecture, urban design, planning, that changes the behavior? What is it? That wasn't answered yet. Certainly architecture matters, and I appreciate Mohammed bringing up the classic research of William White and Kevin Lynch. And I think, Badur, if you wanted to turn this into a paper that could be submitted to TDSR or some other journal, it might be worth doing some additional quantitative analysis of these streets, looking at height to width ratios, fenestration percentages, what gives it the feeling that you've experienced? And then to broaden it out qualitatively, do other people, regardless of gender or orientation, how do other people feel? And that could be done through qualitative interviews. But I think there's a richness here that was expressed in your slides and in your talk that is worthy of going further to figure this out without falling into the trap of determinism. But there's something there, and I was really intrigued by it. So thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Ms. Jafari, would you like to comment in?
Yeah, thank you for your very interesting presentation. I have a comment about the sense you described while being in this district. And I wonder if you considered other factors or other colorations, especially that, for example, we heard in Cologne what happened at the new year in 2015 and 2016 about the mass harassment, and North Africans and Arabs were claimed to be the attackers. And there was a media campaign about that. And this is, so these kind of perceptions are fueled with other incidences. So if you consider these incidences, and of course there are political dynamics, there is the Pegida, AFD, all kind of anti-migrant movements and politics. And of course, these are other points to consider. And I personally, we have in Dortmund district like what you described in Hamburg, and there are some social problems there. There are some polarization there, but on the other hand, there are points of really authenticity, especially like, and this is something I found in the US, in San Francisco, like they celebrate the diversity. In Germany, there's really integration, a lot of integration efforts, but still there's like, this is like, I am German, we're European, there's this kind of attitude, but still there are really like a huge efforts, political efforts and planning efforts in that direction. But still, I believe these spaces should be celebrated and perceived to be really like spaces with identity and even connected with tourism, because one of the pictures you showed, the way they display their goods and their products, this is not typical European or Western, this is typical Middle Eastern, and this is something can be strengthened and even promoted and make it a very distinguished district. So my point is, and my advice is to consider other factors besides being like the actual feeling that's fueled by other factors.
Yeah, the street of the Arabs and immigrants is actually a point of interest for many people who come to Hamburg. So if someone wants to eat a shawarma kind of thing, they go there and they enjoy it. They like the smell, they like the display of fruits and vegetables and all of that. They like it.
Yeah.
But try, they go once, and there was a big sample of people that we asked for this research, and some of them said you go once but you don't go twice. Okay. And for them it's interesting, but it's not inviting again, because but it's not based on prejudices or not. It's not based on political reviews or what magazines and the media says or anything. It's just because they don't feel it is inviting, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah, and another one last remark on that is that it's perceived as unsafe space or even dangerous space for women. I just want to tell you that there is like a study about the criminal agency in Germany. Like most domestic abuse is happening within house walls. So these are the most dangerous spaces for women rather than the open space. Actually, the open space is supposed to be safer than the domestic abuse. This is one thing. And the other thing, I want just to interrelate this to COVID, and there is a higher even record of domestic abuse and rape incidences due to COVID-19. And this is, I'm just saying, it's not just the interaction and the ethnicity and even the culture, although I know European culture is different than the Middle Eastern culture, and it took some time and it's still taking some time to adapt to a new culture, but there are other factors to consider.
Can I say a quick comment or?
Yes, please. I said for Lindsay.
Yeah, just very quickly. When I was talking in the paper about safety, I didn't mean that people get killed and slaughtered in the street. I meant that you walk there and you feel free. Just feel free to walk. No one is looking at you and no one is saying anything to you. I also, again, because I come from a culture that I have suffered a lot from that, seeing that happening again here is not nice. And that was the impetus of this paper. is that I see this happening and no one is addressing it, or they talk about it in closed rooms, but no one is really writing it or discussing it on a bigger scale. So I don't need to be killed, and I don't need to be raped, but I just need to walk there and no one is saying anything to me or to my friend, or about what my friend is wearing, if it's a short skirt or sleeveless dress. Just walk there. No one talks to you. That's safety. This is justice, and this is freedom. This is what I was talking about. And this is basically what the research is about. I also agree with Mark that there's a lot of things can be added to that research. It's a huge topic. Like I said, it's about religion. It's about where I come from. It's about who am I and who are you? And how are you looking at me and how am I looking at you? It's about Germany, it's about Arabs, it's about Asians, it's about a lot of things. So if you talk about all of that, you need years to address the subject and put some solution. I couldn't find a solution. I asked people and they said, create an event. When we play sports, we are happy. No one is asking the other one beside them, are you gay? Are you lesbian? Oh, are you a Muslim? Are you a Christian? No one. You just go into the event and you enjoy it. This is how it should be. And this is justice. This is a public space.
That's great. Mohammed, I want to give you an opportunity. You've had your hand raised for a while. Thank you for being patient.
No problem. Thank you, actually. And I'm enjoying the discussion. And it's just to follow up on, and I don't know what I'm doing here with the screens. Okay, good. Just to follow up with the Jafari's comment and Badur's work, and I can see where you're talking about, or what you're talking about, Badur, and how the clash of culture. But again, I'm not saying one side is right or one side is wrong. Non-judgmental. There is a cultural clash. Mediterranean culture tends to be more about visuals. I mean, that is part of the embedded culture of Mediterranean. It's if you go to Italy, that's what people do. They just watch each other. I mean, that's the culture of Italy. And you contrast that with Germany, which is the ultimate European individuality, if I look at it from that sense, where it's about the respect, the distance, and I couldn't help but think of Edward T. Hall's work, the classic 1950s, and how he looked at, I think the silent language, the hidden dimension. I think it was the hidden dimension, or in the silent language that he talked about. But it's fascinating. So I wonder if issues of acculturation is the problem. Acculturation takes time, and when you have when you have sudden influx of migrants who were kicked out of their homes, or because it was a refugee situation a few years ago in Germany, that just goes into a different. I mean, I remember, and I was watching it in the news, and for me it was shock, but not shock at the same time. It's like expected when you see that clash of culture. Just one comment. I mean, just a thought comment, but fascinating research.
Thanks.
Felipe, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Thank you. Yeah, it has been very interesting. I have a number of notes here, like question-like notes, but they're more about my own curiosity rather than some elevated research conversation. But I would like to ask to Alireza, just a comment. It was amazing to see how secluded, how reduced the space for women was in stadium, and they gave them the worst location, like behind the goal, having plenty of space in the stadium. So it's like, I mean, you always welcome change, but still it's very far from ideal. But my question has to do with the World Cup, and what do you think, or how do you envision the situation there with an influx of tourists, likely more than a few women, from abroad coming into the stadium? Are they going to be able to enter the stadium? In which condition are they going to be placed, like together with the Iranian women? And how is that going to work? What's the impact do you think, might happen or not? I mean, it's an interesting situation to see anyway, but yeah, maybe it's room for a postdoc. I don't know, but
I'm going to interject and say, let's try to keep it to a minute, because we have a few more questions. I want to get to the other speakers, and we only have 6 minutes left. Thank you, Alireza.
That's it for me.
May I answer now? Okay. Thank you for your question. I think that won't happen in Iran. I mean, that the Iranian regime is not interested in hosting the World Cup in Iran, and because it's this is one thing. The other but on the other thing is that I think FIFA has some requirements that cannot be met in Iran. So because of these reasons, I think this won't happen in Iran.
Yeah, sorry, I mixed it up. I had like a lapsus. Of course, the World Cup is not going to happen in Iran. It's Qatar. But maybe the question applies in terms of, you know, the overall context in which women are probably less privileged than men in terms of, you know, accessing to these. But sorry, that was my mistake. I got confused. But carry on. I think you can say something anyway. Sorry about that.
It's all right, but I can say something related to your question. There was some occasions that that foreign women spectators were in Iran, for example, from Syria, from Japan, and then they were allowed to enter the stadiums. Yeah, this happened, but this was also an example of discrimination against Iranian women.
Badur, did you want to comment? You're muted.
Just a quick question to Alriza. What is happening to those who share their photos on social media, the women? Are they being detained or accused of any sort?
No, I didn't find any hints that says something bad happened to them, but there were some other examples from the previous occasions. For example, the women who tried to sneak into the stadium, or a female photographer who tried to document the attempts of women to enter into the stadium. They were detained for a while, but nothing happened to the women who were allowed to attend this match. Yeah.
Very good. We have just a few more minutes left. And Felipe, did you want to add a comment?
Yeah, no, sorry. Just another question to Bedouin. What happens between and around the two streets you analyzed? I mean, is that like a sort of gray area, a negotiating area? Either do the Arab community predominate, or is it the other way around? I mean, what is, like, you know, walking from one street to the other in a way? I would like to see that. I mean,
yeah, and if you leave one street to the other, it is you don't see the predominant signage or representation of each street and in the areas around them. There is one plaza between them that you can really get through from Steindam through the plaza to Langerei. It's very close. It's like, because they're both like a triangle shape, so there is a plaza in the middle. And this plaza is completely a catastrophe. It's filled with drunk people. You can find drug syringes flying around, and we are always advised not to walk there alone as women in the night after a certain hour. It is really not safe. So some spaces lose their character there. They are spaceless. And the other streets are normal streets. You can also find prostitutes because they left Steindam slowly, because now they have to pay fee. And if someone is caught for being like contacting a prostitute, they are being fined by the police. So they moved into the side streets. So the scene in some ways is moving into the side areas, but the main characters of both streets remained very strong. I also should say that closer to Steindam, there is around 13 mosques and zawiyas where Muslims find places to pray. So it's a huge community that is growing on the side of Steindam away from Langerhans. So, and there's also one street closer to Steindam, not to Langerhans, where there is male prostitution, but it is not served by Arab immigrants. It is the prostitutes are, or the sex workers there, should say, are coming from East Europe. But the immigrants, the Arab immigrants who are LGBTQ, they cannot go there because they are afraid, and that's why they travel. So each, like some streets are known for a specific reputation, but the main characteristics of both streets are the dominant streets in that neighborhood. Did it answer your question?
Thank you. Yeah, super interesting presentation.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for that. It is the top of the hour. We have a 30-minute awards ceremony happening right now. So that is hosted by Nazar, Mark, and Hisham. And then our final event for the day are the social rooms. So I look forward to seeing you all in the awards ceremony, and thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.